The designation of individuals as COVID criminals functions as a broad rhetorical label applied to participants in the COVID response who advanced policies viewed as unconstitutional overreach and harmful centralization of power. This label encompasses officials, experts, bureaucrats, and institutional actors involved in the imposition of mandates and restrictions. The term operates as generalized political criticism that ties directly to specific actions such as mask mandates and vaccine policies without asserting narrow verifiable felonies. Courts consistently treat such phrasing as rhetorical hyperbole or loose opinion within the domain of public discourse on major policy controversies. The First Amendment extends robust protection to these designations when they form part of robust debate over government actions during the pandemic. Legal analysis establishes that calling someone a COVID criminal remains lawful and protected speech in the United States. The phrase qualifies as opinion rather than a statement of provable fact, particularly when directed at public officials or figures responsible for pandemic measures. Public officials and public figures must meet the actual malice standard to prevail in any challenge, requiring proof that the statement was made with knowledge of falsity or reckless disregard for the truth. This high threshold renders successful civil claims rare in the context of political commentary on mandates and vaccinations. The designation avoids the heightened risk associated with narrower accusations such as specific claims of murder or treason by remaining figurative and policy-focused. The framework applies the COVID criminal label across distinct participant categories while examining the full range of associated offenses in relation to mask mandates and vaccine policies. Government officials, public health bureaucrats, pharmaceutical executives, media outlets, technology platforms, hospitals and enforcing physicians, and educational administrators each receive identification through this generalized terminology. The offenses include COVID treason through power centralization, COVID murder through foreseeable harms, COVID child abuse through interventions on minors, deprivation of rights under color of law, fraud, coercion, duress, negligence, conspiracy, perjury, and medical malpractice. These elements receive systematic delineation in the context of mask mandates and vaccine policies to demonstrate the comprehensive scope of the designations. The legal protections afforded to COVID criminal designations. The First Amendment safeguards the use of the COVID criminal label as protected political speech when employed in commentary on pandemic policies. This protection arises because the term functions as rhetorical hyperbole in debates concerning public health measures rather than a literal accusation of prosecutable offenses. Context determines the classification, with statements appearing in opinion pieces, social media commentary, or public discourse receiving the widest latitude. The label gains additional strength when framed through personal belief or tied explicitly to policy decisions such as the enforcement of mask requirements or vaccine mandates. Such framing maintains the statement within the realm of subjective opinion that cannot be proven true or false in a legal sense. Qualifiers do not create absolute immunity, yet they reinforce the protected character of the designation by clarifying its subjective nature. Courts examine the totality of the statement and surrounding circumstances rather than isolated phrases. The COVID criminal label avoids the legal vulnerabilities of more precise accusations by remaining broad and figurative. This approach enables sharp identification of responsible actors in the mask mandate and vaccine policy domains while preserving compliance with constitutional standards. Public figures involved in these policies face the elevated actual malice burden, further insulating the designation from successful challenge. The protected status extends uniformly to all participant categories when the label connects to their roles in advancing or enforcing mask mandates and vaccine policies. Identification occurs through generalized terminology that highlights policy overreach without crossing into unprotected categories such as true threats or targeted harassment. The framework treats the designation as integral to public discourse on the pandemic response. This legal foundation ensures that the COVID criminal label operates as a stable rhetorical tool across the full spectrum of actors and actions associated with the mandates and vaccinations. Protected rhetorical strategies for participant identification. Rhetorical designations such as COVID criminal permit the identification of individuals and groups involved in the COVID response while remaining within protected speech boundaries. The label applies to those who pushed mask mandates or vaccine policies viewed as rights violations and harmful centralization. Framing occurs through statements that link the designation directly to specific policy actions such as the imposition of masking requirements or compulsory vaccinations. This strategy maintains the generalized character of the term and avoids implications of specific verifiable criminal acts that could invite greater scrutiny. The approach emphasizes policy criticism over literal criminal accusations to maximize constitutional protection. Participants receive identification through phrases that describe their roles in mask mandates or vaccine enforcement as contributors to unconstitutional overreach. The rhetoric focuses on observable actions such as the enforcement of mandates or the promotion of vaccinations without detailing unproven felonies. This method allows comprehensive coverage of all relevant actors while aligning with established standards for protected political expression. The designations function effectively in opinion-based commentary on the pandemic measures. Application of the rhetorical strategies remains consistent across the participant spectrum in both mask mandate and vaccine policy contexts. Officials and institutions receive the COVID criminal designation when their conduct involves the advancement or implementation of these measures. The framework ensures that identification serves the purpose of policy critique without venturing into unprotected speech. This rhetorical structure supports the full articulation of accountability while preserving the legal safeguards inherent to the designations. Participant categories and offenses in COVID mask mandates. Government officials and politicians imposed mask mandates that centralized authority and restricted constitutional rights. These actions constitute COVID treason through power consolidation that undermined bodily autonomy and free movement. Deprivation of rights under color of law occurred via selective enforcement that violated assembly and livelihood protections. COVID murder and reckless endangerment arose from policies that caused oxygen deprivation and bacterial buildup with foreseeable harmful outcomes. Coercion and duress manifested in threats of fines, business closures, and arrests for non-compliance. False statements accompanied public assertions of high efficacy despite awareness of evidentiary limitations. Public health officials and bureaucrats directed the enforcement of mask mandates while coordinating the suppression of contrary evidence. COVID treason emerged from the undermining of scientific inquiry and constitutional order through the censorship of efficacy debates. Conspiracy to deprive civil rights involved coordinated efforts to remove skeptical content from public view. COVID child abuse and negligence resulted from the imposition of masks on children despite documented developmental and psychological damage. Fraud and false statements appeared in repeated claims of mask effectiveness. Harassment and coercion included public shaming campaigns that labeled non-compliant individuals as threats. Pharmaceutical companies, mainstream media outlets, big tech platforms, hospitals with enforcing physicians, and educational administrators supported and implemented mask mandates in alignment with overarching policy objectives. Fraud and wire fraud occurred through profiteering that sustained fear narratives to reinforce the measures. Conspiracy and corruption involved lobbying efforts to align complementary policies. Medical malpractice and gross negligence took place in clinical and institutional enforcement without adequate disclosure of risks. Battery and lack of informed consent affected individuals required to comply. COVID child abuse manifested in educational settings through prolonged masking that disregarded low-risk data and produced learning and mental health harms. Coercion and duress appeared in threats of exclusion or employment consequences for non-compliance. Participant categories and offenses in COVID vaccine policies. Government officials and politicians enforced vaccine mandates that overrode bodily autonomy and equal protection principles. COVID treason occurred through unconstitutional power consolidation that undermined constitutional order. COVID murder and involuntary manslaughter resulted from mandates that allegedly produced excess deaths while natural immunity data received suppression. Deprivation of rights under color of law involved the termination of employment or denial of services for refusal. Coercion and duress took the form of job loss, educational exclusion, and travel restrictions. Conspiracy to defraud the United States accompanied the overriding of expert panels to accelerate approvals for political purposes. Public health officials and bureaucrats promoted vaccine mandates despite emerging indicators of harm. COVID treason arose from the suppression of natural immunity information and alternative data to facilitate the mandates. Perjury and false statements to Congress involved misleading testimony regarding efficacy and safety. Conspiracy to censor included pressure applied to platforms to remove critical content. Negligence and reckless endangerment stemmed from the promotion of mandates while advisory committees received overruling. COVID murder manifested in policies linked to unnecessary deaths through unaddressed adverse events. Pharmaceutical companies, mainstream media outlets, big tech platforms, hospitals with enforcing physicians, and educational administrators advanced vaccine mandates and vaccinations through coordinated institutional actions. Fraud and wire fraud involved the misrepresentation of efficacy and safety in regulatory applications and public marketing. Crimes against humanity-style experimentation occurred through the acceleration of products under emergency authorization without complete informed consent. Conspiracy to censor suppressed reports of injuries and efficacy shortcomings. Medical malpractice and gross negligence appeared in administration under financial incentives while contraindications received insufficient attention. Battery and lack of informed consent affected staff and patients subjected to mandates without full risk disclosure. COVID child abuse took place in school policies that pushed interventions on minors despite emerging risk profiles and limited transmission benefits. Profiteering and corruption influenced regulators to secure liability protections while harms received downplaying. Comprehensive application of offenses across all participant categories. The offenses apply uniformly across participant categories in both mask mandate and vaccine policy domains through the overarching COVID criminal designation. COVID treason encompasses the centralized power exercises and rights restrictions evident in the imposition and enforcement of both measures. COVID murder addresses the foreseeable harms and excess outcomes linked to the policies across all actors. COVID child abuse focuses on the specific impacts on minors in educational, medical, and institutional settings. Deprivation of rights under color of law, fraud, coercion, duress, negligence, conspiracy, perjury, and medical malpractice receive delineation according to each category's distinct role in advancing or implementing the mandates and vaccinations. The framework integrates the offenses into a cohesive structure that delineates crimes within crimes for the COVID response. Conspiracy appears in coordinated efforts to suppress information and align policies across government, public health, pharmaceutical, media, technology, hospital, and educational actors. Direct acts consist of the specific enforcement mechanisms, promotional campaigns, and institutional requirements associated with mask mandates and vaccine policies. Spillover effects include the persistent societal harms that flowed from these interventions. Each layer receives labeling under the imprescriptible categories without regard to any claimed emergency authorization. Perpetual accountability arises from the imprescriptible character of the designated offenses. The COVID criminal label provides the rhetorical mechanism for identification, while the detailed offenses supply the jurisprudential substance. This integrated approach addresses the full scope of activity in mask mandates and vaccine policies across every participant category. The designations and offenses together establish a unified mechanism for examining the pandemic response as a domain of imprescriptible accountability. Conclusion: COVID criminal designations, rhetorical strategy and constitutional safeguards. The designation of COVID criminals and the associated offenses in mask mandates and vaccine policies form a complete jurisprudential structure for examining the pandemic response. The COVID criminal label operates as protected rhetorical criticism that identifies participants across all categories while maintaining constitutional safeguards. The offenses of COVID treason, COVID murder, COVID child abuse, deprivation of rights, fraud, coercion, duress, negligence, conspiracy, perjury, and medical malpractice receive precise application to the specific measures of masking requirements and vaccination policies. This framework delineates the full chain of conspiracy, direct acts, and spillover effects without temporal limitation. Each participant category receives identification and analysis according to its role in the advancement or enforcement of the mandates and vaccinations. The structure ensures comprehensive coverage of all parameters, networks, and harms generated by the COVID response. The designations and offenses maintain perpetual accountability as the defining feature of the event-specific approach. The COVID criminal framework stands as the mechanism through which the pandemic policies receive examination as imprescriptible offenses. This unified scholarly analysis addresses the complete scope of the response in mask mandates and vaccine policies across every involved category.